For 20 years, a killer can live an unremarkable life. They can raise a family, hold down a job, coach Little League, and become a pillar of their community. They can convince themselves and everyone around them that the past is the past, that a terrible secret can be buried so deep it simply ceases to exist. They might even believe they've committed the perfect crime, but they've made a critical mistake. They didn't account for time, and they didn't account for a specialized type of detective who understands a simple, terrifying truth. Memory is a crime scene, and a killer's mind always leaves clues behind. This is the story of how the quiet unraveling of a human mind can lead investigators to the door of a monster hiding in plain sight. Before we dive deeper into the psychological manhunt, take a second to subscribe to Crimes and Clues. Because here, every story we tell pulls you closer to the truth, where science, memory, and human instinct collide. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. For 2 decades, a murder could be a ghost. It could be a single, cardboard box in the cold case archives of a police department. A file gathering dust, a story without an ending. The killer might have walked away clean. No witnesses, no fingerprints, no DNA. They had every reason to believe they'd gotten away with it. But they never accounted for a detective who didn't care about the evidence that wasn't there. She was looking for the evidence hiding inside the killer's own head. She understood that while physical evidence degrades, a psychological wound only festers. She knew that the human brain, under the right pressure, is the most reliable witness of all, and she was about to prove it. To see how these techniques work in practice, let's walk through an illustrative case, one that pieces together real-world methods into a single story. Imagine a town called Oakhaven, Ohio, in the autumn of 1999. It's the kind of place that feels insulated from the world's ugliness. Quiet streets, manicured lawns, and neighbors who know each other by name. Eleanor Vance was a living embodiment of that gentle spirit. At 46, she was the town's head librarian, a woman who moved through the world with a quiet grace. Her life was one of routine and pleasant predictability, until one Wednesday morning in October, when her story came to an abrupt and violent end. Her colleague was the first to raise the alarm when Eleanor didn't arrive to open the library. A welfare check was requested. 2 patrol officers were dispatched to her small, tidy bungalow. There were no signs of a break-in. After getting no answer, the officers forced entry. The scene inside was unnervingly calm. Nothing was out of place. It didn't look like a robbery or a struggle. They found Eleanor in her favorite armchair, a half-finished cup of tea beside her. She was dressed in her nightgown, a heavy blanket draped over her lap, as if she had simply drifted off to sleep. But she wasn't sleeping. The coroner later determined the cause of death was suffocation. Someone had held a pillow over her face so forcefully that tiny petechial hemorrhages had burst in her eyes, a silent testament to her final, terrifying moments. The murder weapon was an ordinary household object, now resting innocently on her bed. The initial investigation was led by 2 seasoned detectives. A homicide with no obvious motive and no physical evidence was a disorienting challenge. They worked the case by the book, canvassing the neighborhood, but no one had seen or heard a thing. They looked into Eleanor's life, searching for a hidden darkness, but found nothing. Eleanor Vance was exactly who she appeared to be, a kind, gentle soul with no known enemies. The investigation soon focused on the few people in her orbit. An ex-boyfriend from a decade prior had a confirmed alibi. Colleagues adored her. The detectives were facing a void. There was, however, one person of interest, David Harrison, the 35-year-old accountant who lived across the street. When questioned, Harrison was cooperative and calm. He said he'd been home with his wife all evening and went to bed around 10:30 p.m. His wife confirmed his story. He even offered a few observations, like seeing Eleanor bringing her mail. He was helpful, his demeanor measured. Perhaps, the detectives noted, a little too even. But a strange demeanor isn't evidence. With no forensic link and no motive, their hands were tied. As weeks turned into months, the case went cold. There's a psychological trap that cold cases can fall into, something experts call negative framing. When an investigation is labeled unsolvable, it can trigger pessimism in investigators, almost guaranteeing failure. The murder of Eleanor Vance became a ghost story. The box of files was moved to the archives, and for 20 years, it seemed the killer had gotten away with it. 20 years is a long time. By 2019, the Oakhaven Police Department had new officers and new technology. But in the archives, the box labeled Vance, Eleanor homicide remained unchanged. That is, until the arrival of Detective Isabella Rossi. Rossi was a transfer brought in to establish a new cold case unit. She wasn't just an officer. She held a master's degree in forensic psychology. She believed that every cold case file contained a psychological key, a detail overlooked by investigators trained to look for fingerprints, not fissures in a lie. Her first act was to take the Vance case file home and read it, then read it again. She wasn't just looking for facts. She was looking for the subtle psychological terrain of the original investigation. Rossi understood cognitive biases like confirmation bias, the tendency to favor information that confirms what you already believe. She could see the original detectives had spent too much time on an obvious ex-boyfriend because he was a convenient fit for their theories. She was determined to avoid those traps. Her job wasn't to prove a theory. It was to find the truth wherever it led. Rossi dedicated days to a practice known as victimology, a deep analytical study of the victim's life and habits. A picture emerged of a woman who was cautious and private. She didn't open her door to strangers. There was no forced entry. Whoever killed Eleanor was someone she had willingly let into her home. This led her back to the original interview transcripts. Rossi knew that time has a peculiar effect on deception. A person telling the truth reconstructs a memory. It might change slightly with each telling, but a liar isn't accessing a memory. They're accessing a script. Over years, that script becomes rigid and polished. And then she found it. A single sentence in the second interview with the neighbor, David Harrison. Trying to be helpful, Harrison had said, "I just can't get the image out of my head." She loved that armchair, always reading. I remember she was reading that Whitman book, Leaves of Grass, when I saw her through the window a few days before. It was sitting right there on her coffee table. Rossi froze. To the original detectives, this was an innocuous detail, but Rossi cross-referenced it with the crime scene inventory. The book, Leaves of Grass, wasn't on the coffee table. It was on a small end table, partially obscured from the window by a lamp. There was no way anyone could have seen it clearly from across the street. But it was more than that. Rossi dug deeper, pulling the property receipts from Eleanor's purse. Inside was a receipt from a local bookstore, dated the morning of her murder. Eleanor had purchased that copy of Leaves of Grass just hours before she was killed. David Harrison could not have seen her reading it a few days before. The only way he could have known the specific title of that book was if he had been in the room, not days before, but after she was dead. It was a classic psychological slip. A killer, wanting to appear cooperative, offers a detail to make their story more believable. They pull a detail from their memory of the crime scene itself, not realizing they're placing themselves at the scene. It wasn't a smoking gun, but for Detective Rossi, it was the first crack in a 20-year-old wall of silence. She knew her target. Interviewing David Harrison 20 years later required a delicate strategy. A direct confrontation would fail. Her approach had to be subtle. It wouldn't be an interrogation. It would be a conversation, using a rapport-based approach that encourages cooperation over coercion. David Harrison, now 55, was a partner at his accounting firm and a respected community member. When Rossi called, her tone was disarming. She said she was digitizing old files and just needed to clarify a few details. Harrison agreed to meet. In a neutral interview room, Rossi started by building rapport. She asked about his son, his work, the town. After 15 minutes, she casually opened the file and asked him to recount the evening of the murder. Harrison told the exact same story he had in 1999. It was smooth, logical, and delivered without hesitation. It was perfect, and that was the problem. A truthful memory from 2 decades ago is rarely perfect. Harrison wasn't reconstructing. He was reciting. Now, Rossi began to introduce cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort someone feels when holding contradictory beliefs. To get to the truth, she had to make Harrison's lies so uncomfortable that confessing would feel like a relief. "That's interesting, David," she said casually. "You said you saw the mailman at 4 p.m. We have a log here that says the mail route changed that week, and on that day, mail wasn't delivered until after 5. Harrison paused. "Oh, right. Must have been 5. Then, it was a long time ago." She had forced him to make his first on-the-fly adjustment to the script. She continued this, offering slightly contradictory facts from her file. With each adjustment, his cognitive load increased. The first signs of stress began to appear. Finally, it was time for the trap. Rossi leaned forward. "You know, David, there was one thing that always puzzled us. You mentioned the book Eleanor was reading, Leaves of Grass." Harrison's posture stiffened. "Yes? You said you saw it on her coffee table a few days before." Rossi said softly, "How did you know that was a book?" "From your house. It would have been hard to read the title." This was the critical moment. He could admit he didn't really see it, contradicting his original statement. Or he could defend his lie by creating a new one. He chose to lie. "Oh," he said with a nervous laugh. "No, I didn't see it through the window. She told me about it. We were chatting over the fence the day before. And that was the fatal error. By questioning a small detail, Rossi had forced him to abandon his 20-year-old script and improvise." Rossi paused, then sprung the trap. "She told you about it the day before she was murdered?" "Yes," Harrison said, his confidence returning. Rossi opened the file again and slowly slid a single document across the table. It was a receipt from the bookstore. "That's impossible, David," she said, her voice now quiet but firm. "Because Eleanor bought that book at 11:15 on the morning she was murdered. She couldn't have told you about it the day before. She didn't own it yet." The blood drained from David Harrison's face. His carefully constructed reality had just imploded. Rossi softened her voice, using a technique called minimization, which offers a suspect a moral justification for their crime. "David, I think something happened that night that wasn't planned. Things can get out of hand. But carrying this for 20 years, that's a heavy burden. Tell us what happened." Harrison stared at the receipt, his mask crumbling. The words, when they finally came, were a choked whisper. "She was always so nice to me. The full, pathetic story came out. He'd had a quiet infatuation with his neighbor. That night, he went over and made an awkward advance. Eleanor gently but firmly rejected him. His infatuation curdled into humiliation, and humiliation into rage. He grabbed a pillow and held it over her face. The act took less than a minute. The cover-up had lasted 20 years. David Harrison's confession, supported by the mountain of circumstantial evidence Rossi had compiled, led to his conviction for the murder of Eleanor Vance. The quiet librarian, whose case was a forgotten file in a dusty archive, finally had justice. The resolution of this case wasn't the result of a miraculous DNA discovery. It was a result of a detective who understood the intricate architecture of the human mind. She knew that a killer's greatest vulnerability wasn't a fingerprint left at the scene, but the flawed, fragile memory of the crime locked in his own head. The investigation demonstrated that a lie, especially one maintained over decades, becomes rigid and susceptible to shattering under the right pressure. By using rapport to lower defenses, cognitive dissonance to create stress, and a suspect's own ego to lure him into a trap, Rossi turned his mind into prosecution's most valuable asset. Of course, these powerful techniques must be used ethically to avoid the risk of false confessions. This kind of case is a powerful reminder that the work of a cold case detective is a unique blend of patience, science, and profound understanding of human nature. It reinforces a fundamental truth of criminal investigation. While a killer may scrub a crime scene and walk away, they can never escape the one witness that follows them everywhere they go themselves. The past is never truly past. And sometimes, the most damning evidence isn't found in a file, but what's been hiding in a killer's mind all along. Every killer believes they can outsmart time. But as you've just seen, the mind always leaves footprints. And the truth has a way of catching up. The question is, how many secrets are still waiting to be found? If you believe no mystery should ever stay buried, hit subscribe to Crimes and Clues, where every week we uncover the cases time tried to forget. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of this investigation shocked you the most? And remember, sometimes the scariest crime scene isn't the one you can see. It's the one inside the human mind.